appreciate the opportunity to share, details of our emerging tech journey over the past few years with this great audience. We're really proud of what we've been able to accomplish. What I think there's an opportunity here is to, share some insights from what we've seen from the technology trends and specifically the audience trends that we've been seeing, which we feel has been very promising and could really lay not just the foundation, but a timeline of where we see these technologies can have further impact within our industry. So I have a presentation here, and I'll go ahead and do a screen share. Okay, I'm assuming folks can see my presentation. Great. So yeah, Ricardo, thank you so much for thank you so much for the amazing presentation. Just to reiterate, I am Ray Soto, the Senior Director of Emerging Technology. And I've, a little bit about my background is very much heavily on the video games side of things. And I transitioned over to journalism about 8 years ago, and I had no intention to leave video games for journalism. But when Gannet, the parent company of the USA Today network, they had called me and asked me one question: do you know anything about virtual reality? And truthfully, I knew nothing about VR. This was very much early days of, 1 or 2 development kits, but my interest was piqued. And I decided to go in for a very casual interview just to have a better understanding of what Gannet was looking for. And as I was walking into the building, I started to see logos for USA Today. And it dawned on me that, they were very much interested in how we might be able to leverage these technologies to tell stories in a very new way, in a way that hadn't been done before, in a way that was very much inspired by Noni de la Peña, who was recently just, recognized as a Hall of Fame inductee at South by Southwest. And her work really kind of repositioned the way that I thought and the USA Today network thought about what's possible within these technologies. So through this presentation, I'm going to share quite a bit, but I hope to, take you through this journey of how we approach this type of storytelling, how we work closely with our editorial teams across our great network, and some case studies as well of different stories that we've developed through AR. But before we get started, I wanted to ask a question, and this is something I want you all to think about as we start to move forward through this presentation. And essentially, I want us to be honest with each other. Has anyone ever considered what comes next? And I'm specifically talking about our mobile devices. When you look at your device, not much has really changed over the past several years, ever since the iPhone was introduced. Sure, screens have gotten larger. We've noticed that there are better cameras. There's some nice functionality when it comes to a user experience. But what's really interesting is when you think about the incorporation of LiDAR, and I think that is an indicator of where we see things going. So as we are going through this presentation, keep asking yourselves, what comes next? What comes after the mobile phone when it comes to user experience? And how might we be able to look ahead to prepare ourselves on what might come next? So first, I wanted to do a slight introduction to who we are as the Emerging Technologies team. As I mentioned before, we're entering our 8th year, and we've been working very much across different technologies that did include virtual reality and augmented reality, but we see opportunities beyond that as well. As the Emerging Tech team, it is our responsibility to figure out how can we use new tools, products, and platforms and apply them to storytelling in a way that has never been done before. So as we're as we are exploring these technologies, we find ways to implement them in a way that won't impact the strong storytelling that is greatly the focus of the USA Today network. So I feel very, very fortunate to lead a small team of innovators, passionate storytellers, and truthfully great tech accelerators within our industry as it applies to what we're trying to accomplish. So my team is also composed of former video game developers. We have folks from Electronic Arts and CSoft and Disney Animation Studios. We're a team of about 5, and we've got a wealth of knowledge when it comes to interactive storytelling. We're also fortunate to have a project manager with decades of experience in the journalism industry that helps guides us when it comes to merging the two, technology with strong storytelling as it applies to what we're doing. But let's get into the nuts and bolts of this presentation. So ultimately, our goal is to create meaningful interactive experiences that provide value to our audiences. It is really important to us that with our diverse audience across our network, from non-tech savvy users to tech savvy users, from younger to much older, there's an opportunity for us to try something differently. But what we've done is, throughout the years, identified 4 areas of opportunity that make for great immersive storytelling. And those 4 are visuals, interactivity, sound, and pacing. Each of those are important to what we're creating. Without one of them, we are failing. So visuals, yes, that is one component of it. We want things to feel as if it's natural. We understand that it's also complex to present virtual elements within the user space through AR. But at the same time, we want to provide that unique value, which is interactivity, to be able to not just walk around these virtual elements, but to interact with them, to make it feel as if the user is driving the stories themselves. And there are 2 words that we always use whenever it comes to developing these types of experiences as a guide. We use the words explore and discover. Ultimately, what we want is our users to be able to explore and discover a story for themselves through AR. But we also recognize that sound is another very, very important. So through each of our experiences, we'll leverage audio in a way that enhances the overall user experience. So whether it's background music, but specifically through narration, and even through being able to trigger audio that a user interacts with an element that surfaces more information. And none of this works, as you're all well aware from being great storytellers yourselves. It's all about pacing. Early on, when we first started developing VR and even AR experiences, most of our stories were pretty lengthy in nature. I would say some of them were reaching about 10 minutes, sometimes even longer. But based on what we've seen with engagement data, we recognize that we're going too long. So for us, it's all about creating those beats, those moments as if folks feel as if not only they are being guided along this story, but there are moments to take a step back, to understand what it is that they are consuming. And we've recognized that a nice sweet spot for us is about 3 to 5 minutes long. But all of this means nothing without a great interactive foundation. As I'd mentioned before, we are former video game developers, and there are plenty of tools and platforms that are available to create augmented reality experiences. But for us, it was really important to leverage opportunities that would be unique to our audiences through our apps, which is why we are leveraging the Unity game development platform. And it's a pretty robust platform, but ultimately what we are trying to do is ensure that we have a foundation set in place that provides us quite a few building blocks that we can start to reference and pull together for different types of experiences. So from displaying 3D models built through via photogrammetry, we can also display videos, images, and audio as a complement to what the user is seeing. User interaction, as I mentioned, through interactivity is key. So we can support different gesture types such as tapping, swiping on screen, and even walking through the environment as those elements are part of the virtual experience. But for us, it really does come down to accessibility. All of our experiences are available instantly through the USA Today and all of our network apps. It was important to us to be able to serve our audiences with this technology in ways that would be meaningful to them. And the way to do that was through what we were able to incorporate within the apps. So it's great to know that all of the code is already within the native apps. So there is no extra steps to access these stories. They don't have to download certain features. And we're trying to make it as seamless and as easy for users to access so they can get right into the story and start to explore other augmented reality stories that we have to offer. But first, I want to start sharing some of the experiences that we've developed over the years. And like to start with our 1619 project. As part of the feature story, we were asked, what could we develop through AR that might be a value add, a component of this feature initiative that USA Today was developing? And for us early on, we weren't too sure, but as we started to learn more about 1619, we recognized a unique opportunity to develop an immersive experience that folks could feel as if they are stepping into the first slave ship that brought the enslaved Africans over to the Americas. And everything that you see here and with what we developed, we worked very closely with our reporters, with historians. We met with several folks at different museums to ensure that we were authentically recreating this virtual environment as factual as possible. So with this particular experience, working very closely with folks from our reporting and with well-known authors and writers, we ended up developing almost a representation of the journey an enslaved African had gone on. And here's an example.
Our feet blistered and bleeding, we finally arrive at the port of Luanda and gaze upon a beast sitting in the sea. It is the largest ship we have ever seen, and we marvel at the sight. No sooner than we feel the breeze upon our faces do they grab us.
So as you can see there, it was a short story. It was a short example, but this is something that we felt really proud of, and specifically with the amazing team that we had the opportunity to work with. What was really interesting for this particular one, especially when we are creating 3D assets of an element that we've never seen before, we haven't actually stepped into. Being factual was really, really important. And what we did is we wanted to treat this as almost like a museum display, a museum exhibit specifically, something you could step into, and an audio-based story would happen around you. And for us, it was something that we worked quite a bit on, but ultimately it was something that we felt was very unique and really reached our audiences in a way that no other storytelling format could. The next story that I wanted to talk about was an investigative piece. We worked closely with our USA Today investigative reporter, Brett Murphy, who traveled to Afghanistan and interviewed government officials and villagers and former company employees of a contracted security firm, global security firm. And through the interviews and the records, he pieced together a timeline of strategic failures and missteps that led to a tragedy in Azizabad. This particular story is called Show of Force, and it focuses on the peoples and events that led to a tragic evening in the summer of 2018.
This is Azizabad, Afghanistan, population 1,500. On August 22, 2008, this was the site of an American ground operation and airstrike. The target, a Taliban commander. Military officials would tout the mission as a major success. It wasn't. The Taliban commander escaped, and the operation turned out to be one of the deadliest civilian casualty events of the Afghan war. This is a story of lies, spies, and a series of military intelligence failures that ended in tragedy. A key player in it all is a company called G4S, the largest private security employer in the world.
So with these two examples that I've shared, you get the sense that these are powerful stories. And more often than not, folks might not consider immersive technologies like augmented reality as a perfect fit for something that has this powerful weight to it from a storytelling perspective. And with this particular project, Show of Force, we saw an opportunity to fill in the gaps visually when it came to who are the key players within this particular story. And more specifically, how could we visualize how the events had happened, where they had happened, specifically leading up to the night of this tragedy. This particular project, Show of Force, was published 2 years ago, and it is still available and something I recommend folks check out. But I can't talk about our journey in augmented reality without talking about the pandemic. And similar to almost everyone, we had to reevaluate how we work when we went to a full remote work environment. I consider this a challenging pivot. All of us worked very closely together in the same office. We would connect with reporters on a floor above us, and it was a workflow that worked well for us. So as we were starting to transition to the remote work environment, I was cognizant of the fact that I had this lengthy roadmap of projects we were going to support for the rest of this year. And almost daily, I had to reduce projects from our 2020 kind of pipeline. So what went from 12 projects in a year, went down to about 5, went down to 3. Ultimately, once we went full remote, I had no projects to support. And what we did was we noticed an opportunity. There were a lot of questions coming around on CDC guidelines. What did aerosol transmission mean through masking? And we saw this as a perfect opportunity to try something different. And what you see here is a project called Flatten the Curve on the left, which was an interactive mini game in which we presented a user with 5 different scenarios and quizzed them based on CDC guidelines of what is the most risk-averse way to keep yourself safe from contracting the COVID virus. And on the right was another project that we worked closely with a few scientists to visualize the dispersal of aerosol droplets from someone who might be coughing or sneezing and what masking does specifically to help mitigate that. What was really interesting for us is a significant spike in engagement from as soon as we went into the pandemic. For those 2 projects, we saw almost 4.3 million seconds of engagement. And it's really interesting for us when you consider that both of those projects were developed within 5 days. So from concept through a design exercise, working with our reporters and folks who are helping us research to make sure we were factual, and then being able to actually deploy it. So for us, it really started to tell us that things are changing when it comes to audience expectations of how to use these technologies, and more specifically, the value that we're providing based on telling these stories in a different way. So by the end of 2020, we were only able to produce 8 AR projects, but some of these data points that I put up here are the most exciting, and they're letting us know that there's something that's happening with audience expectations, specifically with the adoption and the understanding of technologies. So across 8 projects, we noticed an average engagement time of 125 seconds each, which is phenomenal. A monthly average views were almost 150,000. But when you think about the total views across the year, it was very, very strong for us. So for us, it was a way to really celebrate the fact that we had this strong foundation in place that allowed us the opportunity to support these stories when they're top of mind, when they matter most to an audience who's seeking information relating to COVID, celebrating the suffrage movement, and other stories that we published in 2020. But as we shifted into 2021, everyone was watching what was happening at the US Capitol on January 6th. As we were watching it and working within, adjacent to the newsroom virtually, all we were thinking about is how could we develop a story that would visualize the locations of some of the most iconic photos from the siege at the US Capitol. Now, with AR foundation in place, we no longer had to worry about the how. So we started to connect with our reporters, our photographers, and videographers to see what images we could source, where they were occurring within the US Capitol, and if we could quickly develop and publish an AR project relating to the Capitol in almost near real time. So this particular project here was published on January 7th. From that concept, working with reporters and development to publish, this particular one took us less than 8 hours. We started in the morning and we published it in the evening. It's really tough to do that on a normal basis, but again, we've had that foundation in place that it provides us that opportunity to move forward quickly. And we knew that there was something here that would be of value to folks who are seeking, where is this happening? Provide that context through scale and through anchoring and visualization. On a more lighthearted note, we had the opportunity to work very closely with the Smithsonian Channel. They had reached out to us in February of last year, providing us an opportunity to collaborate to tell the story of NASA's mission to Mars for the Perseverance rover. And we are space geeks. We love to work on this type of content, but we wanted to approach it slightly differently. So what we did here is we focused on the hardware and the technology. We provided a way for users to learn about the new parachute system, to learn more about the mission, but specifically explore and discover those elements that might be unique to this rover and its mission on Mars. And for us, it was also one of our most successful projects of last year, which tells us that this type of content really does resonate with our audiences. But what was most exciting through the publish of that particular project, we wanted to publish this at scale. So working with most of our markets down in Florida and the surrounding region, we published this project to over 13 apps, including USA Today, which helped elevate the work that we were doing and letting the audiences know in these local markets that they are also being served interactive AR experiences. And truthfully, this was probably their first time ever experiencing this. So it was great to be able to showcase that, to be able to deliver that, and for folks to be able to look ahead as far as more stories that we will be serving them through their apps. So this is something that I think is going to be most interesting to this particular audience. It certainly is to us. When we were analyzing our engagement data about the middle of last year, say July specifically, we noticed a significant drop in views between the onboarding sequence and the interactive story. So essentially, we could track millions of impressions of folks who would see the story thumbnail. We would see a slight drop when folks would actually tap on it, but then a steep drop of folks who wouldn't give us camera permissions to be able to go into the story. So we performed a series of user tests to identify the pain points throughout the entire user journey, from the app's front into the interactive story itself. We discovered that the testing group represented our existing audience with a broad range of technical know-how. So the testers provided us with insights relating to a general user's understanding of what augmented reality technology is, and that included the relationship with a virtual projection seen through the phone and what they're actually seeing in their space, but specifically permissions for access. So we all recognize that asking a user to give us access to their camera, there are a lot of privacy concerns. But through this testing, we recognize that there's a way to better inform them that we are only using this to be able to display the virtual elements within their room. And through this exercise, and with what we ultimately ended up developing, we noticed strong returns with using the new design from where we were before. So as an example, from 2018, when we launched our first AR project through USA Today, until the middle of 2021, our total average time spent per user was at 36 seconds. Ever since we updated the onboarding sequence to be more conversational, to better inform our audiences, we've noticed a strong return of almost 3 times the average time spent per user at around 91 seconds. And we're currently trending even higher to almost 4 times our audience engagement time based on what we were those 3.5 years before. So the first story that we ended up producing was with our partners in support of the USA Today Sports Plus. And this particular project was an opportunity to almost soft launch the AR onboarding sequence as a way to not just test our assumptions, but to validate the research that we had done. So for this particular story, we worked closely with our marketing and our reporters to focus on the fans. And we ended up interviewing several fans from different markets and capturing them via a process called photogrammetry, and being able to render them and display them in lifelike visuals and provide an opportunity for audiences to hear directly from them, to learn more about who they are, the passions for their teams, but more specifically, what has inspired their great costumes, such as the one that you had seen in this presentation. The project that you see here, 7 Days of 1961, was our final AR project of last year. And this feature was titled A Dangerous Ride on the Road to Freedom. And we identified an opportunity to tell a story, again, in a different way. Similar to what we were aiming for in 1619, this particular one, we also treated it as a museum exhibit, something you could step into. And as we were working closely with our reporters, we were able to create a timeline of events and leveraging historical photographs, maps, and existing reporting, And we built an immersive experience in which Hank Thomas, who was a teenager at the time and was a freedom rider on this specific bus that we are highlighting, you hear directly from him, and he is your guide, he is your narrator. So for this particular project, you are stepping onto a Greyhound bus that was attacked by a mob outside of Anniston, Alabama.
In 1961, an integrated group of civil rights activists known as the Freedom Riders boarded 2 buses in Washington, D.C., bound for New Orleans.
Anniston, everybody knew more than any other city, was absolutely very dangerous.
A flaming bundle of rags flew through a broken window, engulfing several upholstered seats. Dark smoke filled the bus.
And in that second, he pulled his gun and fired into the air. But between the time he pulled his gun and fired into the air, I thought he was going to shoot me.
So from that preview, you get a sense of how dangerous it was and how tense the experience was for Hank Thomas. As we were working through this project, we wanted to treat this entire experience and the folks who were there with reverence by being factual and creating that experience that is that museum-like exhibit that folks can step into. But one of the parts that I'm most proud of with this particular project was a use of spatial audio. And as I mentioned in one of my first slides, audio is very, very important to creating these immersive experiences that folks are able to more closely engage with. And through this one here, there were elements in which when windows were being broken, when you're standing at a spot, you would almost get that sense of glass breaking from the right, from the left of you, and even behind you, using spatial audio components within our framework. So I added this slide this morning, and I think it's a great segue when we're talking about audio. And this particular project was pitched to us by our reporters at the Courier-Journal in Louisville, Kentucky. And on the 2-year anniversary of Breonna Taylor's death, they proposed an audio-first interactive experience in which they would invite Black women from the Louisville region to share their stories with us. And while I would not necessarily consider this an emerging tech story, I was interested in taking this on because audio is very much going to be one of the first foundations and one of the most important foundations when it comes to immersive journalism, and specifically AR technologies beyond the mobile phone. So with this one here was a really powerful way for us to be able to develop something quickly, release it in several different markets, and provide an opportunity for users across all our networks to be able to hear from these women and how they were impacted.
Anger over her death spread around the world, but it affected no one more than the Black women who saw themselves reflected in her.
We met in high school our freshman year, and we were friends. This is once again a constant reminder of the racist, hatred America that we truly live in.
Breonna Taylor's murder emphasizes how vulnerable Black women are in a violent society.
So these are very powerful accounts from these women, and we are very much grateful that they are sharing their stories with us and with our audiences. But again, why audio? And I'll speak more to that in a couple of slides. But through all of these examples and our journey over the past 4 years, what have we learned? There are 3 things that really stick out to us. The experiences and stories that we are delivering to our audiences provides value. It's driving repeat visits, but more specifically, we are reaching a broad audience, and that is really important to us. We want to ensure that we are providing these types of stories to our wide demographics of tech-savvy users and even non-tech-savvy users. That the way that we treat these interactive stories and how we guide them into the experience, they understand what is happening and they understand the value of what it is that we're providing. Ultimately, we want to make sure that folks not only see this one story, but possibly consume more of our stories. There's a lot of handshaking between our different departments when it comes to the AR just being one component of a feature project, but how can we guide folks between different presentations. So as an example, the AR story that we will develop will be able to guide someone to a long form story if they're interested in learning more. And vice versa, if someone comes across the long form story first, there will be a way for users to learn more by stepping into and providing those visuals in a different format. So for those that are interested in exploring these technologies and applying them to the journalism and the work that you're doing, what's the advice that we have for you? Ultimately, one of the most important is build a cross-divisional workflow. What that means is, in our example, we're former video game developers. We are passionate about storytelling and interactivity, but we also recognize that we have to work closely with the strongest storytellers, and those are reporters. And for us, it's important that we collaborate and work with them and make them a part of our process. And at the same time, we learn about creating strong stories. We have to be transparent and we have to update often. What that essentially means is sometimes when we set out to create a story, as we are getting more information and learning more about the story, we have to be comfortable with making adjustments or even pivoting. I think one of our best examples was with what we did with the Wall project. That immersive experience provided an opportunity for users to step onto the US-Mexico border to get a better understanding of how Trump's proposed border wall would be impacting communities, the environments, and on from there. So we had to make a pivot as we were learning more about the story, working closely with reporters across our network who are embedding themselves amongst those communities along the border. It's really important for us to understand the story. We can't just take information that's given to us and make assumptions. So I recommend that everybody dives deep, identify those unique moments and opportunities that could be a great fit for this type of storytelling through these technologies. Never hesitate to experiment. You have to be comfortable with failing. Set up a workflow, almost like a research and development team, in which you are looking for examples and identifying which tools and platforms would be best to support the stories that you want to tell. For us early on, we went through an exercise of 6 months of research. And this was before we were diving into augmented reality. But even since we started developing that type of content, we'd find opportunities to experiment. So as I mentioned before, with the audio first experiments, We Are Briona, that was a way for us to not only experiment, but we were confident in what we were developing because we had been experimenting with interactive experiences. And this last one, this is the most important. I think this needs to be not just shared within our industry, but industries abroad. You have to be ready to evolve with the technology and with your audience. And what we've noticed over the past several years, audience expectations are changing. They are seeking interactive experiences. They are seeking new ways of understanding information. And that doesn't just mean, technology forward presentations, but it does mean that we have to be prepared to continue to evolve. That the tools that we're using are just an indication of what's to come next. So with that, let's go back to my very first question that I had asked everybody. What comes next? When you look at some of the examples that we have shared, and I'm also curious to hear from all of you, what you think might be coming up next. And from our perspective, when we're looking at the technology trends, from Apple's rumored AR headset, when you look at the work that Meta is doing to bring communities together through virtual reality, the metaverse, and on from there, I think it's safe to know that the future of storytelling will extend beyond a mobile phone screen. So in a way, we could say that the future of journalism is going to be immersive, interactive, and 3D. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Hold on a second, please. Extraordinary the way that you open SIPConnect. Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions, and please, to the people, a la audiencia nuestra que pueden hacer las preguntas o las pasan por Q&A o directamente en el chat y trataré de leerlo. Considering your experience in gaming, Ray, what type of content users want the most? Is that when you're talking about interactive, and you were mentioning a lot of things that you're doing right now, people interact more on sports issues or political issues, or corruption or whatever? It seems that people engage just in certain kind of topics. And is that the experience you have will change the way you are covering news, or the way you do the news?
That is a great question. And it's one of that question, the best way that I can answer it is we've noticed that strong engagement across a series of topics. Sports does very, very well, but that's because we have that particular audience for us is younger and much more tech savvy. But we also recognize that there's an opportunity to tell stories through, let's say, investigative pieces, political stories, and on from there. And what we do is we don't want to treat these stories as games, but what can we take from that interactive game-like experience to drive that story forward? Essentially, we want to be able for a user to understand almost immediately what it is they are consuming and how can we guide them through interactivity. So games really just shares with us an opportunity to learn from what are folks engaging with and how from an interactive experience, and then being able to apply that into the stories. Now, what I think is most interesting is when you look at, let's say, our sports-related content versus, let's say, 7 Days of 1961, which is one of the last projects I shared with all of you. 7 Days of 1961, I wouldn't say that folks are seeking out that type of content, but when you provide a way to tell a story in a different format that they may have never have done before, there's that interest. And then when they're stepping into the bus, they understand what it is. So I feel like there are opportunities across all of them and ways to learn from games when it comes to interactivity.
And Ray, when we're talking about games and gaming, I understood a little bit ago that there are plays to win, or play to win and play to earn, right? And the play to earn is more focused on metaverse and NFTs and things that are coming, and people is engaging with that. And regarding media, do you think that we're gonna have to see an interactive game that will go to play to win, play to earn, playing to learn? That would be the, what is the experience with media regarding gaming and that interactive way of things?
Yeah, well, first, I love that you said play to learn. I think that is a term I'm going to adopt from you, because I think it's a great way to think about the type of stories through gaming. What I would recommend is you have to be very careful on the stories that you're creating and not make light of them by saying, oh, we're going to create a game out of this. I think there are the right stories for those types of experiences. But as it relates to the metaverse and where these technologies are going, think about platforms. What are the platforms that can help you tell the story that you're looking to tell, and at the same time to reach the audience that you're trying to reach? Perhaps you identify an opportunity to reach a younger audience through, I don't know, Roblox, or maybe it's one of those other platforms where you're not so dependent on creating a game experience, but it's a way to connect with audiences that are already engaged in what might be the future of the metaverse as a non-game experience. So interactivity is definitely key. And the play to learn is a way that could be applied to almost anything that we're doing even now. So I think there's an opportunity to not focus so much on, hey, we're creating a game, but how can we create an interactive experience for users to play and learn through platforms that are currently existing and that are continuing to emerge.
Thank you. A couple of questions from the audience. Rodrigo Rotonda is asking, considering the metaverse, are you considering to start developing some content for that universe, or is it too early for that?
I personally feel it is a little bit too early, but one of the 5 key advices that I shared is we are experimenting. But for us, it really is trying to make that determination of when is the right time and what are the right stories to tell for different platforms across the metaverse. What I think is really interesting is when you look at, let's say Meta as an example, where I could see an opportunity for us to connect with, audiences in a different way, not through necessarily an interactive story experience, but perhaps a virtual town hall. I think that is a step forward to understand and learn to connect with folks in a different way. So, some of the stuff that we are exploring right now is looking at some of the tech trends, seeing what different versions of the metaverse are continuing to evolve, and finding opportunities to experiment so we are better positioned once everything starts to become more adopted, provides us the opportunity to reach an audience in new ways in a platform that folks might already understand.
Thank you. Maria Gabriela Alvarado is asking, and I believe I'm going to try to put something else to her question. She says, or she's asking, do you need a high-end cell phone to access this kind of content? And have you monitored Latin America access to this kind of content, or I believe to the technology needed for this? And I would add something else, because you were talking about not being afraid about the future. And it seems that metaverse, and something that we're gonna hear Mauricio Cabrera and Antonio Lorenzo talking after you, it's the mobile first equation that we had before is gonna be sustainable for the next couple of years, or we are gonna enter a new way of using different electronics to access to content. For instance, the other day I was reading Bill Gates. He's already talking about tattoos that will have in your skin instead of using cell phones anymore. So what do you think about what is coming?
It's another great question. And that last statement you had just made is the perfect way of thinking about it. Yes, it's think mobile first, but the evolution of mobile will go beyond a cell phone. So what is the future of mobile? The future of mobile is wearables. And the work that you're doing now and that we're all doing can be applied on where these technologies are going. So to go back to the first question of, do you need a high-end cell phone to be able to access this content? Fortunately, not anymore. These technologies natively work on devices that are, I would say, 7 years old at this point. And even more interestingly, as we're talking about digital first and mobile first, we are very much interested in web AR platforms, which provides an even greater accessibility to reach different audiences in ways that might be more seamless. And lastly, we have done some monitoring with Latin American audiences. I think the earliest examples we had was an app called 321 Launch, which was a rocket launch experience and unique app that pretty much anyone can download and be able to watch live AR broadcasts of a rocket launch. And we noticed strong engagement across Latin America, hits here and there when we first launched that product.
Okay, and the last question, Ray, and people, and I'm trying to put together some of the questions that I received from different people, but is the technology to develop in the new AR content is going to be available also for small publishers, or it seems that when we try to cope with these issues, we see the legacy media, the ones that are powerful and already have a lot of money to buy and use technology. But what about the rest? What about the small media?
There are so many more opportunities now for small content creators to get in for almost no cost. When we first started exploring, interactive platforms, yes, it was expensive. And at the time, we are fortunate where the USA Today Network was investing in us and these technologies. But as I mentioned before, when you involve with the technology in the audience, the technology has evolved to a point where now there are tools and platforms available for free. I would consider using platforms like Spark AR via Instagram, look at Lens Studio via Snapchat. Web AR, you might be able to even access some of that and try some free experimentations with tools that are already available. So more so now than ever. I mean, if you had asked me this question 2 years ago, it'd be much more difficult to answer, but it's great to know that there are tools in which anyone can get started, great resources available. And at the same time, I'd be happy to provide some follow-ups for folks who might be interested in getting started.
Raymond, thank you so much for setting the tone of this SIPConnect. I believe we are going to be talking for the next 3 days around your conference. So thank you very much for being with us.